My name is Jim Herman. I've represented folks applying for Social Security disability and veterans disability for the past 25 years, and thought it was critical that I provide some information related to education, and particularly how that impacts an application for Social Security disability benefits. Um, Many of the folks, including myself, representing people, um, have not taken the time to really consider the significance of education, and how it impacts an application for disability. As a general proposition, the less education, the better. And we all recognize that there's a lot of pressure on people in our society due to our culture and our way of life, that people are pressured to get a high school education, and more. It's pressures from society, it's pressures from parents, um, and pressures from essentially all sides. But when it comes to applying for Social Security disability, and by the way, I can be reached at 800-900-4440, 800-900-4440. And if we're not representing you, I would strongly encourage you to have your representative or your attorney, whomever it may be, um, view this video so that they have a better understanding of the impact of education on your um, uh, odds of being approved for Social Security disability. So the question is really, to what extent does your education impact your Social Security disability application? Let's just refer to that as application to save some viewing time. Um, there are a number of regulations that are applicable. I'm looking at some of those right now, particularly part of the Code of Federal Regulations, subsection 404.1564, your education as a vocational factor. Um, and I think it's important to note too that many people, it's only human nature, many people tend to exaggerate their educational level. Some people will say they're a high school graduate. Some people will say they have earned the GED, the general equivalency diploma, when in fact they really haven't actually earned that. For example, I had a client who was incarcerated, and he said, yeah, I ended up leaving prison when they released me with the GED. And then with further conversation, he indicated, yeah, he said, I had a buddy in jail, gave him a pack of cigarettes, he took the exam for me. So those things happen, and that's what we're trying to get at the root of in this particular session. And let's look again, jump back to the regulations and look at that for a moment. It says, excuse me, says the numerical grade level that you completed in school may not represent your actual educational abilities. And here's the critical phrase, I think, from a regulation point of view. Quote, these may be higher or lower. And so I think it's important to emphasize that what's really required by the Social Security Administration is that a person be able to demonstrate they have the skills that are compatible with the education that they're holding out that they have, so to speak. Um, there are a few general levels that Social Security uses in their terminology. They consider a marginal education, as a general rule, to be an educational level from um, at about the sixth grade level or less. Excuse me. The next category they have is what they call a limited education. Limited education generally means seventh grade through the 11th grade. But again, the key point is those could be higher or they could be lower. I recently had a client who um, presented saying that she had two associate degrees in addition to her GED. And in further discussions with her, though, I became aware that she earned these associate degrees 100% online. Didn't have any class sessions at all, not even any participation. She said, yeah, they would send um, materials to my cell phone once a week, and then I would, either watch some videos or do whatever the assignment says, and that would be considered the examination process as well. So she really didn't even have to take any really written test and truly substantiate that she did anything. When I looked further at what was going on, I identified that the organization that was providing this so-called education was generating a little over $100 million a year in tax dollars in the form of educational loans. So oh, by the way, she said she was an honor student, and so the point is, these folks weren't really interested in providing education per se necessarily. They were more interested in generating the money that came in from those educational loans. And as long as a person was in good standing with the federal government, so to speak, and their educational loans were being approved, then those folks would say, yeah, this student's good to go, and um, we'll categorize this student as an honor student, which they did in this particular case. As it turned out, when I actually started questioning her, and she was, theoretically, she was being qualified to work as maybe a medical assistant in a medical office or an administrative job in a medical office. And when I asked her simple things like, can you multiply 7 times 9? Nope, don't know the answer. Do you know how many inches there are in a yard? Nope, don't know the answer. And so um, the point is, there are some organizations out there that'll say, yeah, you're an honor student as long as we're receiving your federal loan money. So, but the point is, this is the time to set your ego aside when you're applying for disability. Um, and and try to bear in mind that the less education, the better. On the other hand, it's very important, be honest at all times. The folks who make these decisions, particularly the administrative law judges, are very, very good at identifying someone's so-called credibility. In other words, whether or not that person's uh, being totally honest and telling the truth. Um, so let me look at the other part of this particular regulation. Um, but when we look at what's required in terms of the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, what we simply refer to as the DOT, the DOT and the Social Security Administration at present is required to adhere to the regulations in the DOT in the way um, education is described there. And if we look at the absolute minimal levels um, and educational development as defined in the Dictionary of Occupational Title, it says um, um, essentially reasoning, math, and language skills. And the reading says the person should be able to recognize the meaning of 2,500 words, read at a rate of 95 to 120 words per minute. And remember, this is the absolute minimum that's required in jobs that are going to be offered by the vocational expert, either at hearing or before we get to hearing. And then um, with regard to math requirements, be able to perform the 4 basic arithmetic operations and also perform operations with units such as a cup, a pint, quart, inch, foot, yard, ounces in a pound, things of that type. Um, and so don't push yourself necessarily to go out and do homework on those things, because we're trying to show that you do not meet the educational requirements that are delineated in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. But the key word, though, in this part of the regulation says these are required of the worker for satisfactory job performance. Required being the key word. So if you don't have those um, abilities and skills, then you're more likely to be found disabled because you can't meet the requirements. Um, it's also important to point out to anyone involved in Social Security Administration disability is the SSR 13-2P requires Social Security's adjudicators at all levels to be compliant with all of their regulations, whether it be a Social Security ruling or their what they call the POMS, which is their Program Operations Manual, or their what they call the HALIX, some people pronounce it HALIX, which is the Hearing and Appeals Litigation Law Manual. So the point is, Social Security adjudicators, fancy word for people who make the decisions, are required to adhere to and follow these regulations that I've just delineated. Social Security adjudicators will also consider whether or not you have a driver's license and whether or not you had any difficulty acquiring that driver's license. Who knows? Maybe you have difficulty with reading, and someone at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles had to read the examination for you. It's important to point these things out. Maybe you had to take the examination more than once. I've had clients that have taken the driver's exam 3 or 4 times before they finally got through it, and even then they said, well, somebody at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles kind of helped me along as well. So those additionally, with regard to your traditional education, were you ever in any special education classes? Very important. If you were, it's to your advantage. Uh, there may be times in your life when you think, no, I'd rather not talk about that, because people kind of look down on that sort of thing. But on the other hand, if you kind of laid your ego aside for a while, then that would be to your advantage. When we get into a disability hearing, the hearing really consists of 3 parts. The first part is a discussion about your work history. The second part, a discussion about your medical problems, medical, mental, emotional, whatever, any limitations that you may have that might interfere with your ability to perform full-time work on a regular basis. Full-time, obviously, 5 days a week, consistently, 40 hours a week. The third part of the hearing typically has to do with the so-called vocational expert. Many of the people on my side of the fence are reluctant to call them experts, because we are of the opinion that many of those folks are simply making up some of the materials that they are testifying to in a hearing. But the administrative law judge is going to ask that vocational expert a so-called hypothetical question, and that hypothetical question should encompass your most significant, what Social Security calls medically determinable impairments. But more significantly, as it relates to education, which is what we're focused on right now, the administrative law judge is going to start that discussion by saying, assume a person of the claimants, you, same age and education. And then from there, they're going to go on and then delineate the additional limitations. They might say things like this person's limited to occasional reaching, handling, fingering, or they might say this person is limited to occasional balance. And occasional is defined by these regulations as from 0 of the workday up to 1/3 of the workday, 1/3 being a little more than 2 hours in a typical 8-hour workday. And so when you're talking about things like whether or not you're able to lift and carry, and they always use a gallon of milk because everybody doing Social Security work knows that a gallon of milk weighs about 8 pounds. And then you're going to be asked not only whether or not you can lift, but whether or not you can lift and carry that for 1/3 of the workday, which again is a little more than 2 hours, not all at once, but spread out over that 8-hour workday. But and then from that, the administrative law judge in their written decision will make what they call a residual functional capacity finding, abbreviated as RFC. Well, if we haven't really totally accurately portrayed your educational level, remember I said the first part of that hypothetical question is going to be assume a person of your same age and education. And so if we haven't accurately portrayed that educational level, then whatever finding that is made related to that residual functional capacity, RFC, is going to be flawed. And so that should give your representative, your attorney, whomever you're working with, a great deal of information to work with. Because if you have a flawed RFC finding from an administrative law judge, then that can be appealed, and then you should be successful. If you're not approved at the hearing level, you should be successful then at the appeals council, and it should be sent back or remanded, as they say, for another hearing. And so, as you can see, this whole business of an accurate description of your education can become absolutely critical to the outcome of your disability claim and whether or not you're going to be approved or whether or not you're going to receive a decision from the administrative law judge that says unfavorable. And we hope that doesn't happen. And by the way, I work nationwide and am also an approved Social Security Administration video site, so I'm able to represent people all over the United States, all states. So that's certainly not a problem. But if we are not representing you and you have another representative and you've had some educational limitations throughout your life, remind that person to ask you a few basic questions during the hearing. Are you able to answer questions related to pints and quarts? How many quarts in a gallon, for example? Are you able to identify how many inches in a yard? Are you able to answer the question 6 times 8 is what's the answer to that? And we're not trying to prove anything. By passing a quiz, so to speak, we're trying to portray and substantiate that you may have limitations with regard to those elements. Again, my name is Jim Hermann. I work nationwide. We'll be more than happy to talk with you about your claim and see what we can do to help you. I can be reached at 800-900-4440, 800-900-4440. You can call anytime, 800-900-4440. Thank you for listening.